So what is it that actually makes the bike turn? Here we have some of the best riders in the world riding in the race course, World Cup mostly of this year 2025. And let's take a look and see how much rotation they use, body rotation, and how much they're just steering with the handlebars. It's pretty hard to actually tell what they're doing when they're going full speed. You can get glimpses of it, but let's slow them down and see. Watch the front wheel of this racer as he's riding through the course. You can see the front wheel turn and point in the direction around the corner that he wants to go. Here he comes into this turn, he turns the wheel, and there he is, it's pulling him through. The inertial force wants him to continue straight, but because the wheel is turned and there's friction with the ground, it actually pulls him around the corner. Now, rotational force of the body really has very little to do with that force of that tire pulling him around the corner. Let's take a look at a few more of these turns as we go through. Watch that front tire turn and it pulls him around the corner in the direction that he wants to go. Of course, he does have to lean the bike, and leaning the bike helps the tire to turn, but it's the actual steering of the front wheel is what makes the bike change direction. Okay, let's look at the same racer, the same turns, just from a different perspective and see what it looks like here. He comes into the turn, turns the handlebars, and there he is coming through. And the front wheel is pulling him through that turn at the very bottom of the mass of his bike and him. The center mass, the yellow dot, is being pulled to the outside still, and so he has to lean the bike to get gravity to help pull against the centrifugal force that's trying to throw him out of the turn. So he has to get that serious lean. So let's watch him make these next ones. He turns the wheel into the turn. He's stacked up nicely over his bike. The wheel pulls him through the turn. When he gets on the ground, he quickly turns his wheel into the new turn, and the front wheel pulls him through the turn. Very little, if any, rotation of any kind with his upper body. There's definitely lean because he has to have the lean to be able to stay in the corner. Okay, now we have Jackson Goldstone riding a fairly flat corner. You definitely can't see his hips rotating to the outside. He's not swinging his upper body in any direction. It is following the stem of his bike all the way through the turn. Okay, here's another turn. As he comes into it, he's not swinging his hips to the outside or rotating anything. He's directly in line with the frame of the bike and the forces that are acting on him. You can see the seat of the bike is under his rear end or in line with his rear end all the way through. And here we have Lorik Bruni riding some S turns. When we can see his hips here, you can see they are following the stem of the bike. His hips are on the center plane. He's using his handlebars to guide himself through the turns, and he's leaning his body to remain in balance with the forces acting on him. It's the front end doing the steering, not body rotation. He's lined up with that bike.
So what I want you to be doing here is I want you to be cranking your hips so much here and turning your body so much that I would be looking at you coming through this turn.
So we weren't seeing any hip rotation in those best riders in the world, and yet here these guys are showing us serious amounts of rotation of the hips, rotating the hips far to the outside of the turn. This doesn't match up with what the racers are doing.
When you swing your hips, there's like no downside to this, okay? You can go on a straight trail, standing on your bike, and swing your hips out and nothing bad will happen.
The downside is that it puts you in a weak, unbalanced position where you can't pump, pedal, or absorb the bumps in the trail. Mountain biking is all about keeping your balance while you're being bumped and bounced around over rocks and roots and around corners. So how you stay balanced and still can pump and pedal and absorb is really important. Balance is all about keeping your center of mass over the base of support. On a bicycle, we have a relatively long base of support front to back. We can move our center of mass forward, we can move it back, and still stay over that base of support. From side to side, it's very narrow. The tires are only 2 or 2.5 inches wide. Not a lot of room to play with. In this picture, you can see that his center of mass is over the base of support, but the problem is that he's in an awkward and unbalanced stance. So what does it mean to be aligned with the bike? The white line represents the center plane of the bike. When the rider's center of mass is somewhere along that line, they are aligned with the bike. Their legs are parallel to the frame. The seat moves constantly fore and aft between their legs, body-bike separation, but it only moves side to side when they've been thrown out of balance and they're trying to recover. 90% of the time, the seat is between their legs. You can usually tell how well a person is aligned with their bike just by looking at the relationship of their rear end to the seat. The seat should be between their legs. Here's Loic Bruni. His seat is right between his legs. He's aligned with his bike. And as we come in, we can see he's aligned right here because of the two lines. He is all ready to start pedaling and getting power to it, even though he's still in the middle of his turn. Because he's aligned with the bike, he can pedal, pump, and absorb at any point. He's able to use the full range of motion in his legs. You can see that his rear end is on the center plane of the bike. The seat is between his legs. He can absorb the rocks even while turning. He can pedal at any point in the turn. Let's take a look at the forces that are acting on a bike and rider as they ride around a corner. Understanding those forces has a lot to do with understanding how we lean and why we lean and why we balance in the position that we balance when riding around a corner. So here we have Jackson Goldstone coming around the corner. He's coming in and he's going to stop here in just a second, and there he stops. And we have centripetal force that we've talked about pulling his front wheel around the corner. We have centrifugal force throwing him to the outside of the turn. That's the inertial force that wants to keep him going straight. We've talked about that. And we have gravity pulling him straight down into the ground. When a bike and rider go around a corner, they generate centrifugal force. The amount of force is determined by the radius of the turn and the speed they're going. The sharper the turn and/or the faster they go, the greater the force. Rider and the bike are both part of the mass. The center of mass is a few feet above the ground, but the force that is pulling the mass in the new direction is at the ground. It pulls the bottom of the wheel in the new direction, but the top of the mass is still going straight. To get the whole mass to turn requires the rider lean the mass to the inside of the turn so gravity and the lean angle can keep the mass moving around the corner. I'm going to give the amount of force an arbitrary value. The higher the number, the greater the force. Then I'm giving the distance the center of mass is moved to the inside an arbitrary value that relates to the lean angle and the gravity. Those two numbers have to be equal for the rider to be in balance. Remember, the lean angle is not the same as the center plane of the bike. It's a line that runs through the center of mass to the point of contact with the ground. I'm going to say the lateral force has a value of 3. So the rider has to lean enough to create a vertical force of 3. The numbers need to be equal for the rider to be in balance. When the numbers are the same, the forces are equal and the rider is in balance. His center of mass is in line with the direction of force and the base of support. If the numbers are not the same, the rider will fall over in the direction of the higher number. If the centrifugal force increases because of the turn shape and speed, the rider has to lean more to increase the vertical force. Here we've moved the force up to a 7, so the lean angle has to increase to 7. If the rider wasn't in a corner, he would fall over, but because of the two forces acting together, he is in balance at this angle. As the force and lean angle increases, the rider runs the risk of insufficient friction. The tires could slip. The amount of friction depends on a number of factors that most of us understand. I'm not going to go into that here. I hear all the time that the solution is to move the center of mass to the outside of the turn so there is more pressure down onto the tires. Let's look at how that works. Let's move the center of mass more to the outside. Yes, that will increase the pressure of the tires straight down into the ground, but it also reduces the lean angle and the forces counteracting the centrifugal force. In this demonstration, I'm going to say it moves it down to a 3. But we haven't decreased the lateral force, so the rider is either going to fly out of the turn or he will have to grab the brakes and slow down. By reducing the lean angle, he must reduce the centrifugal force by going slower around the turn. If his center of mass is rotated to the outside, what does it look like to get his force values up to a 7? Let's compare the posture of two different riders. One has his hips rotated to the outside and the other is aligned with the bike. The red line represents the line of the forces. On the left, his bone structure is bent and twisted in a number of places and the bike is not aligned with his body or the forces. On the right, his legs and his center of mass are directly in line with the forces and the center plane of the bike. He is applying pressure directly through his legs into the bottom bracket of the bike. From this position, he can pump and absorb obstacles in the trail and pedal as needed. There is one more movement we have to look at, counterbalance. Racers do it, but for them, it's a minimal movement. Because of the greater speed and turn radius, they don't always need as much counterbalance as we do. Counterbalance is really useful for being able to move in and out of the lean position and to adjust the lean as needed. This rider you can see has pretty significant lean, but his head and shoulders are not leaned as much as his legs and the bike. Let's look at Ben Carthrow riding this turn. The seat is between his legs and the legs are aligned with the bike. But if you stop him, you can see that his head and shoulders are leaned a bit to the outside of the turn. Notice his left arm is flexed more than his right. Here's another turn. You can see his head and shoulders aren't leaned as much as his legs. Once again, his outside arm is flexed more than his inside arm. You can see in this picture of Jackson Goldstone, he definitely has a little bit of counterbalance. His hips are lined right up with the bike, but his shoulders are slightly to the outside. Here's another example where it's easy to see the counterbalance. One of the main factors that makes this better than rotating your hips to the outside is that you still get the counterbalance, but your legs are still aligned with the bike so you can pedal, pump, and absorb. Notice how the right arm is flexed more than the left. It's almost impossible to have counterbalance if your arms are the same length. This happens through softening the outside arm, not by pushing the inside arm. It doesn't matter if you're riding a flat turn, a berm, or a gravelly off-camber turn. First and foremost, you have to be in balance. That almost always means being aligned with the bike and having good range of motion. If you're aligned with the bike, you can pedal whether you're going uphill or down, seated or standing. It's simple. You always have to keep your center of mass over your base of support and in line with the forces. It doesn't matter what kind of turn you're doing. Uphill corners can be even more challenging than downhill, but the same principles apply. Center of mass over the base of support and get plenty of counterbalance. Another advantage to keeping your center of mass over the base of support and aligned with the bike is that there's a lot less movement going on. The corkscrew or twisting your hips or rotating your hips to the outside, those are all big moves and they're not very quick to do. You're moving a large part of your mass. If you keep your hips over your seat like the best riders in the world, there's a lot less unneeded movement. Rotating the hips adds no significant turning force to the bike. The hips should be over the base of support in relation to the line of force. The center of mass should be along the center plane of the bike. It's turning the front wheel that turns the bike, not rotating the body. The fastest riders in the world know this. That's why you don't see them rotating their hips when they're racing. It's not just that it's faster, it's easier. If you're like me and into going fast, then you need to really be thinking about keeping your center of mass over your base of support. And if you're not into speed, you might want to be doing it the easiest way you can, which is keeping your center of mass over your base of support. No matter what you're doing, make sure you're out there smiling and having fun.